Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar on NAVsolve and NAVgraph. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Rihanna, I'm a member of the support team, and in just a moment I'll be handing over to another one of our support engineers, Lily. But before I do, I just want to go through sort of a couple of bits and pieces to let you know what you can expect today. So the webinar will be recorded, and I believe this will be sent out to you in the next day or so. So if you want a refresher, you'll be able to watch the recording. As you joined the webinar, you would have been put on mute. So we ask that you keep your microphones on mute for the duration of the webinar, just to keep things running smoothly. The presentation itself is probably going to last for about 30 minutes or so. And that will give us time for any questions you have at the end. So if you do have any questions, you can submit those through the control panel that should be on the right-hand side of your screen. We've got a little questions box that you can type those in, and then we'll get to those at the end. So for now, though, I will hand you over to Lily.
Thank you, Rihanna. So yes, this webinar is on NAVgraph and NAVsolve. So thank you everyone for coming. So the introduction. So what is NAVsolve and NAVgraph? NAVsolve is our post-process software to open the RD files that are logged on the OxTS inertial navigation systems. And you can see the information about the file that the unit logged, as well as information about the unit. Preview the data as a map and a graph just to check that you're post-processing the correct files. A little sanity check before you go through the post-processing system. You can post-process in stimulated or combined processing if you want to improve the GNSS slash just stuff. And you can post-process with RANX for improved accuracy. You can edit the configurations to correct or refine results, and you can generate the NCOM as well as other OxTS file formats for use in other OxTS software, and also export CSVs for use with third-party software. And it does also have batch processing capabilities. Now to NAVgraph. So this is one of the softwares you can open NCOMs as well as the other file formats in. This displays the data graphically and numerically, and all of the displays data is configurable, so you can make your own templates for the graphs and the tables, which you can save as the templates and load for analyzing specific characteristics of tests that you want to look at. And you can also select regions of the files, export just specific portions of the files to analyze the data that way. And you can also export CSVs from NAVgraph as well. You can also export KML files for viewing in Google Earth. So now a little bit more about NAVsolve in particular. So this software shares the look and feel of NavConfig, which you can open through this for editing configs. So this is the source page. So use the left panel to navigate through the app on the side there. So the source page, this is where you're getting the data from. If you just click on the file, it'll open you to this page with the correct folders, but you also have a couple options. You can download it directly from an RT, use an RT file stored on your computer, or use an NCOM file if you're just using the export feature. The next page is the preview tab. So this just gives you product information about the unit, feature codes, hardware config, as well as this is where you can preview the graph and plot data, just in a little table, just the raw uncombined measurements, so IMU or GNSS. And you can just also see summary of the data packets in the files for, again, a quick sanity check. Next is the process tab. So this is where you can review the configuration if you need to. You can add RANX files to improve the accuracy. And this is also just controlling the process, so if you want it simulated or combined, as well as where configuration is coming from, stuff like that. Next is the export tab. So this is where you could create CSVs as well as like POS data files. and this is the way you'd configure the file types and the contents. You can also export the files based on logged trigger signals instead of just one continuous file. And you can select a start and stop endpoint for the data if you do just want to export for a specific part of the file. And then finally we have the batch processing tab. So this is kind of a combination of the previous two tabs. You can set up the settings in the previous two tabs or change them here. So you can select the RyanX files from here, for example, and just control the export. So this can do processing and export, so you can export CSV files from this page as well. And you can also save the batch processing settings if you're regularly batch processing same kind of files from the same output. You can save those settings. Next is NAVgraphs. This is what the software looks like. At the top, we just have the graph. Here you can add kind of any measurement you want, multiple different axes, to kind of display the data how you like. Next is the map, which is just the bird's eye view of the data. Data trace throughout the file, and you can also use the cursors to match the data on the graph versus the map. Then we have a table, which again you can read the data that's shown in the for the cursors, the two cursors you have, the blue and the black one, and also calculate the difference. And then again, this is configurable. You can add measurements if they're not already in the table. And then finally is the content. So this is if you have multiple different files open, you can see which one you can choose the map color from here, and also just where the file is saved, the file name forward. So now I'm just going to go through an example. So I've got just an RD file here. So if I double click on this, it will open it in NAVsolve. So here we just have that source page of NAVsolve, and 3 options at the top from the unit on the system, or process navigation data if you're using an NCOM. And you just have a tick box here, so if you have multiple files, you can choose the ones you'd like to select. Now if I go next, if you go to preview, again, this is the preview, so you can see this is an RT3000V3. This is the firmware ID for it, so that's recent firmware. Feature codes, if you want to check what's enabled, if you're using GXX, and you're sure, you can check that here to make sure you can get RTK in post-process with RyanX files. Hardware config, again, just information about the unit. If I go to the graph tab, here you can see, so this is the just raw GPS data. The speed is plotted here, and then the bird's eye view is plotted here. So if I click on Bing Maps, you can see that this was taken at the airfield near our work. And then you also just have some other data, so like the raw accelerations and angular rate values that we'll get from the IMU. So it's just the raw GPS and the raw IMU data in the preview tab. And again, you can just check this with the cursor. And finally, the data analysis tab. So this just gives you some information. You can see file size, bytes read, and then if there's any errors, any bytes discarded, and then the packet matrix. So here you can see there were 11 user commands, so commands sent through like NAVdisplay. There was differential GNSS data, there was wheel speed data, status messages, and then the IMU data and the GNSS data. And the IMU and the GNSS data are kind of the main portion of the RD file, as you'd expect. Now if I go to the process tab, you can see here we've got the options to review the config. If I select this, this is going to open NAVgraph. And here you can review the configuration. So if you wanted to change any configuration settings, or again, you have these two options: to modify the configuration if you just want to change something, or to improve. So if you already have an encom for this file, you can improve the configuration, taking the warmed up values from the data that way. And I'll just change the leave around tolerances and kind of improve it that way. But if you just go to modify, this will take you through just the normal nav config options. So if you set your orientation wrong, you could correct it here. Again, you could change perhaps vibration levels just to see which works best for your settings, again with GNSS environment. If you initialized poorly, you initialized on a corner, you could change the initialization speed to change where you initialize in the file. And same with this, so if you wanted to change the display output or enable it, you could do that. So you kind of any changes you can make to the config you can change here. And then you can just go to the last save configuration tab and you can just save that if you've made any changes. And you do have these little traffic lights at the top just to say whether or not you need to save it. So currently it is saved to disk, so I don't need to change it. If I go back to here, if we just continue on, just review config. Next we have the process options. So here we have simulated, combined, or simulated and combined. So the benefits of doing combined, instead of just processing the data forwards, processing it backwards and then combining the two. This means if you have any GPS blackouts, once you lose position, it can take a few seconds to regain the position once you start receiving GPS data again. So if you process it before and after, you will maintain GPS position for longer after these blackouts. So if you're going through a tunnel, you'll go through the tunnel and then there'll be a little patch after the tunnel where you're receiving GPS signal, but you don't have position lock. When you do combined, you'll have position lock from like the other direction until you lose that signal again. So it can improve in post-process the GPS position and therefore the position accuracy. Next is the base station options. So if you have a base station near you, you can search for RANX files through the auto downloader. I'm not sure if there are any. Yes, there's not currently for any for this file, as this file is quite old, so they've been moved from where they've been archived from where they normally are stored. But you have the option to search for them here, or if you have them downloaded or created, you can just manually look for them. Let me just find where mine are currently kept. I'm just going to copy this in because I wasn't sure about where they were. So now that I've selected the folder where they are, I have the options to select these files, and you should be able to zoom out and you can see that is where our RANX base station file was. So that'll be now me using these RANX files in post-process. You can select multiple files and it'll just use the closest at any given point. So if you have a file that goes over a long distance, you might want to download multiple different files. So you have the closest base station possible throughout the whole file. The next tab is local coordinates. This is for enabling local coordinates in post-process, mainly for using our LiDAR software, our georeferencer, as you do need to have local coordinates enabled to use that. So you can do that in post-process just by moving the cursor, select the position, you can see it on the map as well. And then you can just select that origin here, and that will change the configuration just to make it a bit easier so you don't have to try and manually input longitude and latitude. You can just select it from the file. And the final tab is the advanced settings. So this is you have advanced smoothing options, outputting NMCOM, which is the marine version of NCOM. It just has the additional message of heave if that's something you're interested in. I'm not, so I'm just going to untick that. You also have the options to clean up the working folder after processing, so that'll delete all of the other configuration files which have just been outputted, as well as the different process folders. I'm just kind of keeping you with the main NCOM and a couple of other files that you want, and then also options to download missing ephemeris. This isn't a regular thing, but if necessary, you can select that. And also the option to display results in NAVgraph. So now when I press process, it'll start processing with the settings I currently have. And you can see here we've got the forward process and the backwards process being processed kind of in tandem. You can see both units initialized, and I'll just be going through the process full working through the files that's sent. So this can take a little while, depending on the length of your file. This will take longer or shorter time. So if you are processing really large files, especially in combined mode, be aware this can take a few minutes. And now we're just going into combining. So this is actually combining those two files that we just created previously. And now that is done, it should open itself in NAVgraph. Here we go. And now here's that processed file in NAVgraph. This is just the speed default template. I'm actually going to close this and we'll go back through and we'll do the export tab. So here we have the export tab. This is for outputting CSVs. So at the top we have the time reference. So this is selecting the start and stop time as well as the time format. So here you just select it from the graph. You go to the graph tab. And you can select as much or as little of the file that you want. And you can see again with the cursors, it's kind of highlighting and selecting the portion of the file that you've selected. So if I just go up to where we become stationary, then here we are. Then when I go back to the format tab, you can see it's just filled out those start times for us. The output settings here, you've got the output rate. This will go up to whatever the unit was set to. So if you have a 250 Hz unit, this will be up to 250 Hz. File type, you've got CSV, but you've also got a couple of other standards. And then you also have just the options of what to write the invalid text as, and also what to name the headings. So depending on what you're using, so you can have no headings or just the standard short names, long names, or the legacy names if you are trying to compare them with older data you may have used or from RT post-process. We do have legacy names available there. Next is the files. So here you can output the main file, just the singular CSV. You can choose where that folder is, where the file is saved, and what the CSV is called. But normally it'll just go to the same process folder. If I go to the trigger output, so this is where if you are using triggers, logging them in the data, you can select to auto increment the files. So you can have an individual file between each trigger, or you can output all the triggers to one file. And again, you can just select whichever trigger you have it enabled. If you wanted it falling edge for start and stop, depending on what you want to use it for. Or again, you can just have it as one single file in the main output file folder. You can output both at the same time if needed. Next is the measurements. So these are just going to be measurements that you are actually outputting. There are just some default time, position, velocity, accelerations enabled. You can change the units in the drop down, and you can choose if they are the filtered results if you had filters enabled. So for acceleration, it's pretty common to use just the acceleration filters. If I go to add measurements, you can see here all of our measurements. They're categorized in this main one, but you can just click through, see what measurements you want, or you can just use the search bar at the top and add them as you want. If you want to change the order, you can use the arrows on the side here. And then the next tab, the graph, again, this is just what we looked at. You can input your start-stop times, and you also just have a little preview. So these measurements here are just the measurements that you have selected, just down here. And then lastly, the filter options. So we do have a 12-pole Butterworth post-process phaseless filter, if that is something you require for your post-processing. So now when I export this, hopefully that is just exported. So I only select 1 Hz, so it's not a very long file. And now when I go to the folder, it should be in there. So this is the file arrangement that you get. So you have the RD file as in the main folder, and then you'll have a process folder for each process that you end up doing. So when I click into here, you get the base station files, the forwards, backwards, and combined processing folders, and then the main processor. So this is the configuration that was used. We have a copy of the RD file, we have the XCOM and the NCOM, and the process log. And now we also just have the CSV that I outputted. And here you go, here's all the data that we can see there. You can see accelerations forward, lateral, and down just at the end here. Are not outputted until the unit initialized, which you can see is not until a little way into the file. So if you do open a file and there's a lot of blank spaces, it's just because probably that measurement's not outputted until initialization. But if you are having any issues, just contact support. Let's save that. And what we'll do now is we'll just go through a quick batch processing example as well. So here, I've got batch processing tab. You can see I've got 3 RD files in this folder this time. So again, if you just double click on the RD file, it will open it in NAVsolve. This time I've selected all of the files, but you don't have to, you can manually select them how you wish. You can go through the preview tab for each of them if you'd like, just to see the information for the files, and you just select the file that you want to use from this drop down. So to use batch processing, the files, they don't have to be from the same unit, they don't have to be from the same day or time or anything. They can be any units that you want, and you have the choice to use the configurations from the RD files if you're using them for multiple different units, or if they're from the same setup, multiple different days, you can change the configuration settings to be a specific file. So you can use the same configuration across all of them. But what you can do is you can go into the process tabs, and you can kind of just set how you want the settings to be in here. So if you want to combine, you can choose that. You can choose configuration from raw data, or you can choose from file. Same with export, you can choose the measurements that you want. Anything like that. And then in this final page, the batch processing tab, you can also configure any of the options you want. So you can see here we've got processing type combined, config from raw data. You have the base station option, so if you want to use local files, like I used in the previous example, or you can use the auto downloader and it'll just scan through. If you want to export anything, so you can choose the export settings and you can add the measurements you want. So if I just add acceleration X, Y, Z, you can see they've just shown up here. And again, you can save the batch processing settings just using the save to settings file. And now when I batch process, it'll just go through. You can see it says 1 of 3 files, and it's just going through the processing. And it'll do this for each individual file and then make its own process file. You can leave this, so if you have lots of different files, you just want basic ncoms from, or you want to change configuration settings or anything like that, you can do this, and then just let it post-process in the background as it goes through each of the files specifically. Now 2, 3. It goes through processing. I'll also quickly go through export as well. Which you can see now, exporting. That was very quick, just because it's again set to output just for 1 hertz. If you are using a higher data rate, it will take a little longer. You can see now we're on the 3rd one. So if I go to the folder again, you can see, so we now have this batch process folder, which just says batch process and then the date that it started. And now when we go in here, there is a folder for each of the RD files that we were using. So now when I select this, you can see again the same file format, the base station files that are used, forward, backward, combined processing folders, CSV, and then the ncom, and just all that data. And you have this just for each file, as you can see here. So now what I'm just going to do is go through just some of the NAVgraph features. So I've just selected an ncom in this case to open in NAVgraph. And here we have again the ncom. So at the top here we have the graph. This is currently set up to speed, but to add any measurement, you right click, configure graph. And here you have just general, so you can add a title. Sorry, set name this one speed. And then you can choose the color of the title, x-axis. So here you have some options for time. So local time, time from initialization, seconds from Sunday. But you also have that option to have distance on the x-axis. So you can have distance horizontal, distance 3D. If I just go distance, start time from start of file. And the y-axis, here you have up to 8 axes. You can label what you want. So if I put speed here, this is going to label as speed. You can add grid lines and change the min-max axes. So now if I go back to here to add measurements, it's just the add measurements button. If I go for, let's say, add some position accuracies, you can see these have been added. I will change these to a different axes on the same axis. And you can also choose the width, the style of the line, and the color. So currently we've just got some different colors. And now when I press OK, the new graphs will be loaded. So here you can see again, we've now got the grid lines, we've got a title, we've got an axes label, and then we have the 2 different axes for speed and position accuracy. As you can see, for this position accuracy, it's quite hard to read because position accuracy starts quite high and then gets increasingly lower. So if you just want to change the area that you're viewing, so if I change this to just like 0.8 meters, here you can see position accuracy. You can see how it progresses out the file a lot more easily, and you can do this with any of your accuracy, any of your measurements. If you want to select a portion of the data, say you just want to see this last segment, you can choose it with the cursors, right click, and then just select the region between the cursors, and this will open it into this second tab, page 1, and it'll just show that data. If you wanted to export just that section, you can export a CSV for this section, and that'll be it'll be the same kind of process, export the CSV, and that'll just use the measurements that are currently configured in the table. And you can also export a KML file just for this section. So if I select here, you'll see the KML options. I'm just going to lower the data rate, and I have launch Google Earth after exporting enabled. So now when I do this, it'll export it and it should open it in Google Earth as well. So you can just see the KML file, the bird's eye trace. And it'll just take you to where the data was. So again, this is just an airfield that we use for testing. You can see this is the position trace of that portion of the file. So you can do it for the whole file. But I just did it for this section. So if you do want to output a CSV from here and you want to change the measurements, you can right click on the graph, again, configure table, and it's the same kind of thing. All the measurements are available. They're categorized here, and you can just use the categories or you can search for them. You have the two different cursors that are just going to give you the measurements in the table as well. As you can see, as these move, the measurements move. You have the difference, so you can see here the difference between these two cursors currently is 456 seconds. If you want to look at specific times, you can also look at different speeds, kind of anything. If you wanted to change the map color, you can do that here as well. Just see that changes. So you really can just configure this how you want. On the side here, you have the options for zooming. I can zoom in, I can select an area that I want to zoom in on. Here we have that. You can zoom out. You can use the region selector instead of trying to choose between the cursors. Again, this will just open it in a separate tab. And just got that portion of the data there. You can save this layout page as a template. So you can either save it in a local folder using the normal floppy disk sign, or the one with the globe, that will save it globally. That'll mean it'll come up in this template selector down here. So these are some pre-made templates that you can just download automatically with the software. So if I select on one of these, this is just going to open a different template. So here it just has the heading. If you want to just see what each line is, right click View Legend. You can see here it's this unit's heading, and that's what's enabled. But there are lots of different templates. So if you do want to create a template and have it available in this drop down, you'll just need to save the file globally. You also have the option to open a file. So if you've opened a file locally, you can open it this way. You can also, instead of right clicking and configure graph, you can just press this little tool button and it'll just take you straight to that graph configuration option. And this last one is just for unit selection. And this is just kind of default unit selection that you want for the measurements. So if you wanted it in miles rather than meters, you can change that, so you didn't have to keep changing the units as you go. So that is the software, NavGraph and NavConfig. So if we do have any questions, we can go through those now. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look and see if anybody has sent in any questions at this point. It doesn't look like we've had any yet, although we can sort of give people another few minutes in case they've got anything that they want to ask about. But in the meantime, just so that everybody is aware, we do also have a support website. So this is support.oxts.com, where we have various articles that might answer your questions as well. And we do have the support email address as well. So if you want to ask us a question after the webinar, if you think of something later on, then you can send that in to support@oxts.com, and we'll be able to get back to you with an answer there. We've also got various other webinars that you can access using this link here, so oxts.com/resources-hub. So you can sign up and register for any of those that we've got upcoming. Let's have a look. Have we had any questions in the last couple of minutes? It doesn't look like it, so I think in that case, thank you for your presentation, Lily, and we can end it there. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yes, thank you everyone for listening. If you do have any questions, again, you can just email support. So I hope you have a good